Different types of challenging behaviour, of course, require different types of approach. This is one of the most fundamental principles of challenging behaviour, and yet it's overlooked with alarming regularity. Just as with other challenges we come across in life, behavioural regimes and strategies are most effective when we take the time to understand the problem before we begin to work on the solution. In the broadest sense, behaviours can be divided into two basic categories. These are behaviours that harm the individual and behaviours that harm other people. Of course, some behaviours will fall into both these categories, so it's not quite so simple as all that, but this way of thinking does at least provide us with a starting place. Let's look at these categories in turn. Behaviours that harm the individual. Well, for those of us who work in health and social care, it can be very distressing and frustrating to see our service users undermine their health, their social situation, their state of mind. At times like this, there is a temptation to intervene and simply try to prevent the behaviour. Sometimes this is appropriate and necessary. For example, if the service user appears to be actively suicidal. But not always. Often there's a judgment to be made between potential damage or harm and the benefit of experience that will help the service user to learn from their mistake. Everyone learns best from consequence, and it's not necessarily helpful to shield people from the consequences of their actions. The more we intervene and prevent people from making mistakes, the less they grow and develop while in our care. This might seem like a simple point to make, but it's also a fundamental principle that goes to the heart of social care work. If we accept that our job is to help people to be all that they can be, and in most cases to go beyond the need for our help, then we must also help them to learn how to cope without us. They need the skills and understanding necessary to survive in the real world. It's our job to help them to develop these skills. After all, there's no point in expecting them to survive outside our care if we haven't helped them to prepare to take a few managed risks and to learn how to deal with disappointment too. Part of that preparation, that development, is to learn how to deal with disappointment, understanding that actions have consequences and that in the real world we all have to face them. We do our service users no favours by teaching them that they don't need to face the consequences of their actions. This is why, for example, a service user who damages property should be given a bill. A resident who sulks and refuses to come down for dinner should go hungry, provided, of course, that there's no physical or psychiatric reason behind that refusal. People learn from the consequences of their actions, and it's not the job of social care staff to shield them and prevent that from happening. So when the challenging behaviour is detrimental to the service user themselves, the first decision to be made is whether to intervene at all. If you do intervene, it should be because the risk of harm to the individual is greater than the benefit of the learning experience. Often a debrief after a mistake is much more productive than intervening to avoid the mistake in the first place. I am assuming, of course, that before we even begin to consider behaviours as challenging, the normal process of discussion and advice, which we need to be cautious about, has been followed, and the service user hasn't responded. That's why most of the time we focus very little of our attention on the challenging behaviour itself. Much more time and effort should go into the debrief and the process of encouraging behaviours that we do want to encourage than trying to discourage behaviours we want to reduce. Generally speaking, the more we focus on a behaviour, the more it occurs anyway. So only intervene if you have to. Remember, Our duty of care doesn't ask us to prevent the development of coping skills. Rather, it asks us to manage the risks associated with that development so far as is reasonable and lawful. That's for behaviours that may harm the individual. Now, let's look at behaviours that harm other people, which is a very different kettle of fish. And in these circumstances, it is necessary to intervene. Service users don't have the right to hurt others, no matter how much they might learn from the experience. Just as you and I don't have the right to hurt others. The rules are the same for us all. If you heard of an assault, you must take reasonable steps to try and prevent it. If necessary and appropriate, call the police or some other outside agency as needed. If an offence has occurred, then of course you have the same responsibility to contact the police. You absolutely should not make the excuse that, well, the service user is a service user and therefore somehow exempt from the law. There are countless cases where people have been excused by the care staff because they have anger issues, which often simply means that they haven't been bothered to control themselves, who were let off, and as a result the behaviour escalates. And there are countless reports of care workers who've been severely injured or even killed by people who had been consistently let off, and their previous poor behaviour and assaultative behaviour was not checked because people sort of understood. And of course the behaviour escalates because there's no consequence, the person doesn't learn, and because they haven't learned, they go on and on and on until somebody dies. This isn't hyperbole, this is true. People like Jonathan Newby in the Oxford Cyrenian tragedy, or Jackie Ewing in Hebden, or a range of people were murdered by service users who had not faced consequence. Don't make that mistake. If you do have to deal with challenging behaviour, if it is something you have to respond to, then do respond. And respond in a very definite and unambiguous way. I'm Stuart Sorensen, and you can find me at www.mindthecaretraining.com. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video or found it useful in any way, please feel free to share it around to others who also might find it of value. And if you click on the little character icon in the center of your screen right now, you can also subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it if you did. Thank you for watching.